The Henderson Tower pierced the Manhattan skyline like a glass and steel needle, while on the 90th floor, the most shocking moment in American corporate history was unfolding. Richard Henderson, 82 years old, empire worth $30 billion, was dying of pancreatic cancer. The 5 sharks in Armani suits circling the mahogany boardroom table were salivating for their coronation as his successor. But the old lion had orchestrated one final, devastating twist. He called in his grandson Tyler, 12 years old, autistic mathematical genius, whom everyone considered the embarrassing relative to hide away. The boy entered, studied each face with surgical intensity, then pointed his finger, not at the executives with their Hermes ties, not at the power-hungry family members, but at the corner of the room where Maria Santos, 52 years old, was emptying the trash bins as she had done for 20 years. The janitor with a GED who cleaned the bathrooms of Manhattan's elite had been chosen to lead an empire. The executives laughed until Richard signed the documents. In 90 seconds, an invisible woman became the most unlikely CEO in America. But what no one suspected was that Maria Santos was hiding a secret that would shake the entire Wall Street establishment to its core. The boardroom of Henderson Global floated among the clouds of Manhattan like a spacecraft of capitalism. The floor-to-ceiling windows framed the city on a November morning so cold that the breath of surrounding skyscrapers seemed to crystallize in the air. Richard Henderson lay in his ergonomic chair, worth $50,000, his body ravaged by cancer, but his gaze still sharp as the blade he'd used to cut throats in business for 50 years. Around the table, 5 men waited like elegant vultures. Michael Chen, the chief financial officer, had turned tax evasion into an art form, moving billions through offshore havens with surgical precision. David Williams managed operations by squeezing blood from stones, or rather, profits from Vietnamese children paid $3 a day. James Morrison had made the Henderson brand synonymous with unattainable luxury, the kind only Russian oligarchs and Saudi princes could afford. Robert Taylor governed human resources like a petty Stalin in a double-breasted suit. And Christopher Henderson, Richard's 40-year-old nephew, hid his cocaine addiction behind sales results that justified everything, including his connections to the New York underworld. Richard had summoned them at 7 in the morning with a message that had shaken the NYSE before opening bell. Today, he would choose his successor. Each had prepared McKinsey-level presentations, graphs promising stellar profits, strategies to conquer emerging markets. Each had already planned how to eliminate the others once they seized power. But when the door opened, it wasn't the lawyer with succession documents who entered. It was Tyler Henderson, 12 years of misunderstood genius locked in a brain that processed the world in ways neurotypicals couldn't even imagine. The boy that Manhattan's high society called Richard's problem. The one who talked to numbers instead of people, who could calculate the square root of 6-digit numbers but couldn't look anyone in the eye. Tyler walked around the table with his peculiar gait, his hands moving in repetitive patterns only he understood. He stopped before each executive, studying them like an entomologist examining particularly repugnant insects. Michael sweated under that gaze that seemed to see through his corrupt soul. David attempted a smile that died on his lips. James nervously adjusted his $3,000 tie. Robert swallowed audibly. Christopher, suffering from a cocaine hangover, trembled imperceptibly. The boy completed his circuit and returned to his grandfather's side. Richard, with a voice that was barely a rasp but retained the authority of someone who'd built an empire from nothing, asked the question that would change everything. Who should lead the company? Tyler didn't hesitate. His finger rose and pointed toward the corner of the room where Maria Santos was emptying the wastebaskets with the same methodical precision she'd employed for 20 years. The woman froze, the garbage bag suspended mid-air, her face a mask of disbelief. The silence that followed was thick as tar, Then chaos erupted. The 5 executives protested in unison, shouting about senile madness, mental incompetence, conspiracies. But Richard raised a skeletal hand, and everyone fell silent. With gestures that cost superhuman effort, he signed the documents his lawyer presented. Maria Santos, janitor with a GED, single mother earning $1,400 a month, became interim CEO of Henderson Global. The executives stormed out of the room like a stampeding herd, already on their phones with their lawyers. Maria remained motionless, still holding the garbage bag, while Richard studied her with eyes that saw much more than they revealed. Tyler approached her and, for the first time in years, smiled. In that smile was a secret only the two of them shared. The news detonated in the financial world like a nuclear device. Newspaper headlines were merciless. Markets reacted with pure panic. Henderson stock plummeted 30% at opening, burning $9 billion in market cap in 3 hours. Hedge funds demanded emergency shareholders' meetings. Unions didn't know whether to rejoice or worry. Competitors were already preparing offers to buy pieces of the crumbling empire. Maria found herself catapulted into a universe she knew only from its dark side. For 20 years, she'd cleaned that office on the 90th floor, emptied wastebaskets full of confidential documents, polished the desk where billion-dollar destinies were decided. Now she sat behind that desk, and the view of Manhattan spreading below gave her vertigo not from the height, but from the absurdity of the situation. The first week was hell-orchestrated with sadistic precision. The executives boycotted her with the subtlety of carpet bombing. They presented documents in incomprehensible financial English, organized meetings without notifying her, spread poison through the corridors. The secretaries giggled when she passed. Middle management ignored her. Even the cafeteria barista served her cold coffee. But Maria had a secret weapon no one suspected. 20 years of invisibility had transformed her into the most informed person in the company. While cleaning offices at night, she'd read every document carelessly left on desks. She knew every dirty secret, every illegal maneuver, every skeleton in the closet. She knew about Michael's slush funds in the Cayman Islands, David's under-the-table deals with suppliers using child labor, James's bribes to journalists, Robert's sexual blackmail, Christopher's selling of company information to pay drug debts. But the real bomb exploded when, rummaging through dusty archives in the basement, Maria found a forgotten box. It contained documents from 1992, when Richard Henderson had just begun his ascent. Among the yellowed papers, a photograph paralyzed her. It showed a young Richard shaking hands with a brilliant MIT graduate, Maria Rodriguez, 23 years old, summa cum laude, revolutionary thesis on sustainable economics when no one was talking about it yet. Maria Rodriguez was Maria Santos. Memories crashed over her with tsunami force. The marriage to the man who'd seduced her with promises of supporting her career. The beatings when she dared accept a better job than his. The pregnancy that made her even more vulnerable. The midnight flight with 2-year-old Sophia. Fake documents procured by a friend at a women's shelter. The descent into poverty's hell. And then that job as a janitor at Henderson Global, where no one would ever look for her, where she could be invisible and safe while raising her daughter. Tyler appeared in the office doorway with his characteristic walk. He sat in the chair facing the desk and, without making eye contact as always, dropped the bomb. He knew everything. He'd hacked university databases, cross-referenced biographical data, reconstructed her story. He'd chosen her precisely for this, because she was the only person in that company with the skills to lead it, and the humanity to change it. Did Richard know? Maria never got the answer. The patriarch died that night in his sleep, taking his secrets to the grave. But before dying, he'd made one last move. In his will, read the next day, he left his 30% stake not to Christopher or other relatives, but to a foundation whose president would be Tyler when he turned 18. And until then, the foundation's legal guardian would be Maria Santos. The Monday of the second week, Maria called a general assembly in a place that shocked everyone. Not in the conference room with its panoramic view, but in the underground warehouse where the workers labored. 800 employees crammed between shelves and forklifts, a sea of faces ranging from Armani-clad executives to immigrants who cleaned bathrooms on the night shift. Maria climbed onto a wooden crate, still wearing her old janitor's apron over a suit bought at Target. The contrast was deliberate, a visual message more powerful than 1,000 words. When she began to speak, her voice carried 20 years of silent observation, repressed anger, wasted intelligence. She told of watching executives pocket millions in bonuses while cutting workers overtime, of mothers fired for pregnancy, while managers spent hundreds of thousands on luxury escorts paid with company cards, of revolutionary patents from junior employees stolen and credited to bosses, of talent wasted because they didn't have the right last name or weren't willing to prostitute themselves. Then she announced the changes. All salaries would be public, from hers to the last intern's. The ratio between maximum and minimum pay would be 1 to 20, not 1 to 300 as it was now. Free company daycare for everyone. Worker representation on the board of directors. Investments in training instead of luxury company cars. The executives were livid with rage, the workers paralyzed with disbelief. But when Maria revealed she would cut her own CEO salary by 90%, redistributing the difference as raises for underpaid employees, the warehouse exploded in applause that shook the tower's foundations. Executive resignations came en masse in the following weeks. Michael, David, James, Robert all abandoned ship convinced it would sink within a month. Only Christopher remained, too intoxicated by cocaine to understand what was really happening. But for every shark that left, Maria fished 3 pearls from the corporate ocean floor. The temporary accountant who'd devised a system to save millions, but was ignored because she was a woman. The Pakistani worker who'd invented a revolutionary production process, but didn't speak English well enough to present it. The intern who knew the Chinese market better than any consultant paid in gold. Tyler, meanwhile, had developed what he called the balance algorithm, a system that calculated not just the profit of every business decision, but also its human, environmental, and social impact. Every choice was filtered through this grid.
Enjoying the story? Give it a little like, and don't forget to subscribe. Now then, let's carry on.
And many practices that generated enormous profits, but destroyed lives, were eliminated. Stock continued falling. Media massacred her. Analysts predicted collapse within 6 months. But in Henderson Global's corridors, something extraordinary was happening. Productivity increased. Absenteeism plummeted. Innovation, long suffocated by hierarchy, exploded like a geyser. Employees arrived early and left late, not because they were forced to, but because they wanted to. For the first time in 20 years, they believed in what they were doing. In the 3rd month of the Maria era, when the first timid signs of recovery began emerging from quarterly data, the sharks launched their attack. The 5 former executives had allied with major international investment funds to attempt a hostile takeover. They'd accumulated 47% of shares and aimed to reach absolute majority to oust Maria and install Michael as new CEO. The extraordinary shareholders' meeting was called for March 15th at the New York Stock Exchange. Maria had only 2 weeks to orchestrate a miracle. How could a former janitor beat global finance sharks at their own game? The answer came from a combination of mathematical genius and maternal instinct. Tyler had analyzed every stock transaction of the past 20 years, discovering hidden patterns of insider trading involving not just executives, but also several board members and even some regulators. Maria, for her part, had mobilized the invisible army, the employees. In 2 frenetic weeks, the unthinkable happened. 800 employees, from secretaries to workers, emptied savings accounts, sold family jewelry, took out bank loans. They formed a cooperative and bought every available share on the market. The price rose, they bought. Funds sold to realize profits, they bought. In the end, the workers' cooperative owned 4%. But the real coup de théâtre came the morning of the meeting. Richard Henderson, even from beyond the grave, had one last ace up his sleeve. His will contained a clause no one had noticed. In case of attempted hostile takeover, the Tyler Foundation had right of first refusal on any stock package for sale. And Tyler, using the algorithm he'd developed, had predicted every move of the sharks with millimetric precision. When Michael Chen stood up, certain he had the votes to take control, Maria played her cards. The Tyler Foundation exercised its right of first refusal on the 18% of shares that small shareholders had promised to sell to the sharks. With the foundation's 30%, the cooperative's 4%, and the newly acquired 18%, Maria had 52%. The room exploded in chaos. Michael screamed about fraud. David threatened international lawsuits. Fund representatives talked about appeals to the SEC. But the documents were unassailable, prepared by Manhattan's best law firm, paid for with Maria's life savings. The janitor had beaten the sharks, but the real war had just begun. With control of the company consolidated, Maria began digging into the Henderson Empire's darkest secrets. Every drawer opened, every hard drive analyzed, every document unearthed revealed new horrors. The company was built on foundations of corruption so deep it seemed impossible to save anything. But the most shocking discovery came from a hidden server in Christopher's office. Richard's nephew wasn't just running a small drug-dealing operation to finance his addiction. He was the center of a blackmail network involving half of America's power structure. Compromising videos of politicians, entrepreneurs, judges, recorded in Henderson Global's private hotel suites. An archive of depravity that guaranteed contracts, permits, favorable rulings. Maria faced the biggest dilemma of her life. Exposing everything would mean the company's destruction. Thousands of innocents laid off. The scandal of the century. Staying silent meant being complicit in a rotten system that had destroyed lives, including hers. It was Tyler again, with his alien and perfect logic, who showed the way. Sitting in his office, surrounded by monitors displaying data streams incomprehensible to most, he devised a strategy that was a game theory masterpiece. Separate the wheat from the chaff. Save the company by sacrificing the guilty. Use the blackmail not to perpetuate evil, but to force the corrupt to confess. Maria executed the plan with surgical precision. She secretly summoned each blackmail victim, showing them the videos and offering a choice. Cooperate with justice in exchange for destruction of the evidence, or see everything published. One after another, politicians and businessmen crumbled, confessing crimes that went far beyond what was documented in the videos. The night before going public with everything, Christopher Henderson burst into Maria's office. He was deranged, his eyes two wells of chemical madness, a gun in his hand. He screamed that the company was his by blood right, that a janitor couldn't steal his empire. But he hadn't considered Tyler. The boy was in the office, hidden in his favorite corner behind the bookshelf, where he spent hours reading financial reports that were poetry to him. With precise movements learned in years of occupational therapy, movements others considered nervous tics, but were actually a mental martial art, he disarmed his uncle. The gun fell. Christopher collapsed in hysterical tears. Maria made a choice that surprised everyone. She didn't call the police. She called a rehabilitation clinic, the best in Europe. She paid out of pocket, with those savings accumulated over 20 years of cleaning. Because she'd learned that revenge is a luxury only the rich can afford. The poor must settle for something harder: forgiveness. A year after that insane morning when Tyler had pointed at her, Maria Santos sat in the same office on the 90th floor, but everything had changed beyond recognition. The once austere walls were covered with drawings by employees' children. The $100,000 desk had been sold and replaced with a normal, functional one. The $1 million paintings had been donated to museums, replaced by staff photos. From the window, Manhattan gleamed in the spring sunshine, and, for the first time in 20 years, Maria could look at the city without feeling crushed by its indifference. The numbers told a story that Harvard and Wharton would study for decades. Revenue had halved, but profits had doubled. How was it possible? By eliminating corruption, waste, inefficiencies, the hidden costs of wrongdoing. The company was smaller, but infinitely healthier. Europe's best talent lined up to work at Henderson Global, attracted not by astronomical salaries, but by the chance to work somewhere ethics wasn't a slogan, but daily practice. Tyler had his office next to Maria's, officially Chief Innovation Officer, in reality, the oracle who saw the future in numbers. His autism, once considered a family tragedy, had become the company's superpower. He saw opportunities where others saw chaos. Solved in minutes problems consultants couldn't even define. The old executives had met different, but all instructive fates. Michael was in prison, sentenced to 20 years for tax evasion and corruption. David had fled to Brazil, but was extradited and now served his sentence. James had committed suicide the night before trial, leaving a letter confessing crimes no one suspected. Robert had been convicted of serial sexual assault, finally paying for years of blackmail and abuse. Christopher was the only redemption story. After 2 years of rehabilitation, he'd returned. Not as an executive, but as a warehouse worker. He wanted to start from the bottom, he said, like Maria had. And Maria had welcomed him, because she believed in second chances, even for those who didn't deserve them. Sophia, Maria's daughter, had returned from England where she'd taken refuge after being fired. She now ran the new corporate medical department, a cutting-edge center that cared not just for employees' physical health, but mental health, too. The daycare center bearing her name housed 200 children. It was Manhattan's best, and it was free. But the real miracle was something else. That morning, Maria had received an unexpected visit. 30 women, all former janitors, waitresses, factory workers, had come seeking her advice. They wanted to replicate the Henderson model in their companies. They wanted their own revolution. Maria looked at them, saw herself in each one, and understood that what she'd done wasn't an anomaly. It was the beginning of something much bigger, a wave that would sweep away the old way of doing business, replacing it with something revolutionary. Companies that put people before profits, ethics before greed, humanity before numbers. Tyler entered the office with his characteristic gait, sat in his favorite spot by the window. They didn't talk often. They didn't need to. They understood each other in a way that transcended words. They looked at Manhattan together, seeing not the city it was, but what it could become. The phone rang. It was the President of the United States, wanting to offer Maria the position of Secretary of Commerce. Maria politely declined. She already had a job, she said, and she liked it. The President insisted, spoke of patriotic duty, unique opportunity. Maria smiled and hung up, because she'd understood something fundamental. Real power doesn't lie in commanding from above, but in demonstrating from below that another way is possible. She didn't need a cabinet position to change America. She just needed to keep doing what she was doing, proving every day that a janitor could run an empire better than any MBA, that empathy was more important than efficiency, that respect was worth more than profit. As the sun set over Manhattan, painting the skyscrapers liquid gold, Maria Santos, former janitor, accidental CEO, revolutionary by necessity, knew with crystalline certainty that the real cleaning she'd done that year wasn't in the sanitized balance sheets or the white-collar criminals filling prisons. It was in consciences. She'd proven that impossible was just a word the powerful used to maintain their power. That when an autistic child sees what financial geniuses cannot, when a janitor knows more than all consultants combined, when humanity wins over greed, then everything becomes possible. And as Manhattan fell asleep, unaware that in its bowels a revolution was being born that would change global capitalism, Maria Santos smiled, because she knew a secret the powerful would never understand, that real power isn't inherited or bought. It's earned by cleaning other people's toilets for 20 years and learning, in silence, how the world really works. And she wasn't done cleaning yet. Hit like if you believe merit matters more than privilege. Comment with the moment that struck you most. Share to celebrate all the invisible ones who deserve to be seen. Subscribe for more stories of redemption and social justice. Sometimes the greatest leaders are those who've cleaned others' bathrooms. Sometimes revolution begins with a mop in hand. And sometimes, just sometimes, an autistic child sees what financial geniuses cannot see. That a company's true value isn't in its revenue, but in its soul.